This is the River Wye, which forms part of the border between England and Wales. It's one of the most beautiful and famous rivers in Europe. But something has gone horribly wrong. Over the next hour, I'm going to try to find out why, find out who is responsible, and why they have not been stopped. I wanted to make this programme because of something that happened last year. I'd been coming to the Wye for years and swimming here, canoeing here, kayaking here, messing about in the river, and it had always been a beautiful, a stunning place. But last summer I came here and everything seemed to have changed. The river had gone brown, and when I swam in it and the water came up to just below my nostrils, I almost gagged because the smell was so bad. And when I came out of the river, it was as if my whole body were covered in liquid snot. It just felt slimy. And you can see right now, even though the conditions are different, that something is very wrong here. These stones, a few years ago, and I was here a few years ago, they were completely clean. And now they're covered in green slime. In fact, even since yesterday, the volume of this slime has doubled. And look, it's really, really slippery. If you tread on that carelessly, you end up on your bottom. It's completely different to what it was. Let's have a look, see what it looks like underwater with our cunning development in plastic box technology. Now, hopefully, you can see that green slime slithering around in the water, but very little life. There should be far more fish, far more insects. Oh, hang on a minute, there is something here. That's an interesting life form. This is the nearest you get in real life to a mermaid. It is the person they call the Wild Woman of the Wye, Angela Jones. Now, Angela, you've probably got more experience of the Wye than anyone else. For decades, you've been swimming here every day. What's altered? Tell me what's altered.
Well, everything, from the taste of the water, to the wildlife, to the clarity. I mean, it's just diabolical. I wouldn't swim this section anymore. I've only done this today. But it just tastes foul. It smells foul. I've been monitoring and logging the water crowfoot, and it used to blanket sections of the Wye.
That's a beautiful plant, isn't it? It's like it's got
stunning.
Yellow and white flowers which stick up above the water. And this is crucial for life forms, isn't it?
It's protected. It's illegal to take it out. I mean, the swan and the geese eat, the larvae are below it, the fish. But we've lost over 95% in the last couple of years. So well, I used to glide through it. There's nothing there.
Well, we've got some aerial shots taken at Foy on the River Wye. And the first one was taken in 2019, which shows, look, you can see those long strands of the water crowfoot. I mean, it's that beautiful, beautiful habitat. Then the second one, same time of year, 2020, in other words, the following year, completely empty. I mean, it's eerie. It's just amazing. And the actual mechanism killing it has got something to do with another kind of plant, hasn't it?
Well, the sections of the Wye, the algae bloom, I mean, it just starves the river of oxygen.
And these are tiny, floating, microscopic algae in the water. Yeah. And they're driving this whole river death, this riverside, which we're seeing at the moment. Angela, thank you so much.
Pleasure.
And happy swimming if you can. So, okay. Mechanism number one, we've got these blooms of these tiny microscopic algae, and they're getting stimulated by the nutrients coming into the river, nitrates, phosphates, and the rest of it, which are like fertilizer for the algae. And they form these smothering plagues which shut out the light, which draw oxygen out of the water, that kills the plants and the animals. And as Angela says, it's devastating, but not just to her, because Nathan Jubb here, now you've also got a very long history with this river, haven't you? You're a salmon guide. You help people to catch salmon. Tell me about your history on the river.
Well, I caught my first salmon when I was 8, and I've been on the river now for 45 years.
And
And
what changes have you seen in that time?
massive changes. Mainly the biggest change is obviously the algae blooms, but the lack of weed now, the lack of cover for not only the salmon. There's a whole lot we don't see. The otters, we don't see kingfishers. There's no dragonflies anymore. The river stinks. It looks horrible.
And what effect is that having on your business?
It makes it very, very difficult to even operate a business, and very embarrassing to bring people down to the river. We don't know when the algae blooms are going to be at the worst. We have to cancel days. We've cancelled 2 corporate events this year already. You just can't base your weeks or days around it.
How quickly has this been happening? I mean, is this in decades? Is it in years?
In the last 10 years, we've seen the river go down. Since 2016, it's absolutely plummeted, almost to, I would say, dying now. We're on a precipice with it. We could probably have enough salmon invertebrates in the rest to put it right, but we need to charge the way it's going. It's not going to happen.
And how does that make you feel?
Well, it's like watching someone you love die of cancer. Someone that you've spent a lot of time with, and it's heartbreaking, soul destroying. It really is.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Well, so you would expect in a situation like this, the organisations which are supposed to be protecting a river like this, covered by every designation, every form of conservation law, to be all over it like a rash. Okay, and in Wales, because we're on the Welsh side at the moment, this is Natural Resources Wales. On the English side, it's the Environment Agency. So you'd expect them to be monitoring, enforcing, legislating, but where is it? Where's the action? We were hoping to ask Sir James Bevan, the Chief Executive of the Environment Agency. We've asked again and again whether he would come onto this programme, but it's been, a flat no. Now, James, the invitation remains open for the next hour. If you want to talk to us, you've got our number. Please just ring in. I'm sure you want to show that you are a less two-dimensional character than you might otherwise appear. And a fundamental problem here is they've lost their budgets. I mean, it's the most extraordinary thing. In the midst of a national pollution crisis, Natural Resources Wales has had its budget cut by 1/3. And these guys, the Environment Agency, would you believe it, by 2/3. How can they operate under those circumstances? And if they can't do it, if there's no action on the part of the officials, well, what we're seeing is citizens stepping up to fill that gap. And all along this river now, they're doing one of the jobs of the Environment Agency and Natural Resources Wales, which is monitoring what's in the water. Now, obviously, they don't have the budgets, they don't have any statutory powers, they don't have all the equipment, but they are doing their best. And among these many people doing it is Morgan Jones down in Monmouth, which is 80 miles downstream. Morgan, tell us what you've been testing for and what you've been finding.
So I'm situated just below Monmouth town at the confluence of the River Trothy and below the sewage treatment works. I'm testing for phosphate. I've been here for several months now and I've been getting consistently high readings. My average reading is around 0.38 milligrams per litre, and the maximum limit set by the Water Framework Directive for a good quality river is around 0.15 milligrams per litre. So I've just taken a sample this evening, and as you can see, it's 0.53 milligrams per litre on the Hannah low range checker. So this is around 3.5 times higher than the standard set by the Water Framework Directive. But because we're below the sewage treatment works, around 200 yards or so, I've been taking E. coli samples, and as I have no sort of specialist equipment, I've been using my sister's tortoise lamp to incubate the E. coli sample at 25 degrees for 48 hours. And this has provided results at around the E. coli in the water is 4 times greater than that of a water with good bathing water quality. So you might not want to be coming swimming here anytime soon, George.
Well, Morgan, thank you very much indeed, and thanks for your great efforts. It's lovely to talk to you. Now, while we've been talking, Dave, our drone operator, has just put his beast up in the air. Fly, my beauty, fly. And the reason for that is that we want to find out why all these phosphates and E. coli and other things are coming into the water. Could it be primarily, as in the case where Morgan is, perhaps, could it be sewage? We've heard a lot about sewage farms recently, water companies pouring raw sewage straight into the water. And as it happens, just behind those trees over there, which Dave will be showing us very shortly, there is a small sewage treatment plant. Could that be part of the bigger problem that we're seeing in the River Wye? Now, while Dave is taking a look at that, I'm hopping into the boat for my next appointment. Right, now, what's Dave got there? Let's see. Just coming into view is this fairly small sewage treatment works. I mean, it's by itself, I'd imagine it wouldn't be that massive, but who knows, in conjunction with other sewers all the way down the river, perhaps this is the major problem. Now, we asked people from around the country to send us footage of sewage pollution in their local rivers. And I have to say, and no disrespect to any of those who sent it in, it is disgusting. And it's just, you're seeing in real time, in front of your eyes, Riverside, the death of our rivers here. These revolting fatbergs. I mean, look, the fatberg actually flowing into a river. And all these horrible things which come down in the sewage, you know, some of which should never have been put there in the first place, but they certainly should have been stopped by the sewage treatment works. There's a sheep there determined to come in. They're out to get me. That's the other thing, sheep. And one of the people who's been taking this, I can't say wonderful footage, it's really revolting footage, is Ash Smith from Windrush Against Sewage Pollution, WASP. And with him also is Professor Peter Hammond, one of his neighbours and a fellow campaigner. Ash and Peter, thank you very much for joining us, and thank you for your lovely footage. Yeah, could you tell me a bit about the work you've been doing, the campaign and the data that you've been gathering?
Okay, we started this off about 4 years ago when we saw the same sort of thing that you've been describing on the Wye happening on the Windrush. And it soon became clear that if we didn't do something, the Environment Agency wasn't going to. It basically had given up and was going to let the water industry continue doing what it wants to do. We don't have a big issue with farming down here. Our farmers are family farmers. They're responsible, they're responsive, but we did identify sewage as being the big hit to our river, hence Windrush Against Sewage
Just go
Pollution.
down the rapid. And we're going into a bush. Watch out, Franny.
Okay, well,
I shouldn't try to steer and talk at the same time. Oh, that was a fantastically crap bit of canoeing. Anyway, sorry.
Well, hopefully you've got some footage of an area above a sewage works.
Hopefully we're now seeing some upstream, downstream footage. So here's upstream, and there's downstream. I mean, look at that contrast. So it's absolutely extraordinary, isn't it? And the thing is, you know, it's you who's gathering the data on this. I mean, why aren't the regulators doing it?
Well, the regulators seem to have completely lost interest. So Peter Hammond has been doing some really complex analysis, and he's the best person to talk about it.
So I've analysed the performance of more than 100 sewage works across the country, and I've identified thousands of illegal sewage spills. That's spills occurring in dry weather or in low rainfall, which is illegal, or spills occurring when the sewage works is not maintaining the minimum amount of sewage that should be treated even during a spill, and that's illegal.
Are you able to tell us what's going on at this little sewage works at Glaisbury? Is that a major spiller of raw sewage?
It's not a major spill. It spilled about 42 times last year for a total of about 430 hours. So not a big spiller.
That sounds horrendous. That sounds awful. 42 times for 430 hours. I mean, that sounds terrible.
Well, you haven't heard anything yet. It's not uncommon for 4,000 hours in a year for spills. I've found quite a few examples of that. Sometimes even spilling for 6 months continuously without a break. And what is even worse is that in the case of the Mogden sewage treatment works near the Twickenham rugby ground, we know the volume. And we know that last year it spilled 7 billion litres in 1 year. And on 2 days in October, October 3rd and 4th, it spilled 1 billion litres on each day. Now that's 16 Olympic-sized swimming pools worth of untreated sewage every hour for 48 hours.
And many of these spills are illegal, I
All of
take
that
it.
was illegal.
Unbelievable, unbelievable. Well, thank you so much, Peter and Ash. That was really helpful, if not edifying. So, is sewage the problem here? Well, it turns out it is a problem, but there's actually something even worse going on. I know that sounds hard to believe, but on the River Wye at the moment, we've been coming across an even more immediate cause of environmental destruction in the river. I managed to drift a little bit downstream, so I had to slightly amend my ways to talk to two of the people who have helped to expose it. And yet again, because the regulators aren't there, they're just missing in action, we're having to turn to citizen scientists filling the gaps which the official bodies should be occupying. Lovely. Here we are, I made it. Thank you so much. Thank you. I was wondering there if we were actually going to manage this. Anyway, it's great you're here. Thanks. Now, while I've been going down the river, Dave has been sending his drone round the bend. We've all been going there, but his drone has picked up something much bigger looking than the sewage treatment works we saw. What's that?
Ah, that will be the large chicken unit just downstream from here, which houses 180,000 birds, according to the last planning application. It's very intensive.
Yeah. So they're packed into these big sheds, those chickens. Are these for eggs or for meat, these ones?
These are for meat.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's not the only one of these.
Oh, that's not the only one. We made a tally of them all by looking at planning applications.
Christine was looking at the Powys part of the catchment, and they worked out that there were about 4 million.
4 million in the Wye
chickens.
in
chickens.
the Wye catchment.
So that's in the county of Powys.
Yeah.
In the county of Powys, 4 million.
Yeah. And I was looking more at Herefordshire. I came up with an estimate of 16 million, which is 20 million together.
20 million chickens in this catchment.
They just don't seem to be keeping a tally, or if they were, it wasn't being made public, which is why we felt we needed to do the research on both sides of the border.
So obviously I know chickens poo. I don't see the connection between the chickens pooing in a shed and the pollution of the river.
Well, the thing is, then you have to dispose of the manure. The chicken manure contains 5 times the amount of phosphate of sheep and cattle manure which we're used to, and the amount of manure that's spread is more than the requirement for the grass and the crops on the land, so there is excess phosphate there. Now, some of it runs off the land if we have one of our famous Welsh rainstorms, which we get so many of, but if this doesn't happen, it sinks into the soil, and then it gradually is released and gets to the river. So this is a slower way of it getting into the river, but it builds up over time, and we are building up this stock of phosphate.
So what you're saying is that ultimately it doesn't matter whether the farmer does it responsibly and spreads it on the land or just dumps it straight in the river. It will get in the river. If there's too many chickens for the land to absorb their dung, that dung will end up in the river, or the nutrients in it will.
If it's more than you need for the uptake of the plants growing on the land, in the end, it will go into the river.
And that's what's happening here. Well, listen, Christine, Alison, thank you so much. You've been really helpful. Sorry, I missed a crucial question. Free range, is it better?
It's fewer birds per unit, so in that sense, it's less manure, and numbers count. But the rangers outside are obviously collecting the manure all the year round, and
so that can wash straight off.
And that can wash straight off.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for that, for stepping in there. But so one of the biggest companies which is contracting free-range egg farmers in this catchment is Noble Foods, which is the country's biggest egg producer and has the biggest egg brand, which is this one, Happy Egg. I was quite curious to see what actually goes on inside these free-range farms. And, well, yes, I suppose they're free-range, they're outside. This is them also inside. These are the free-range chickens in one of the factories contracted to this company, Noble Foods. Maybe their eggs are happy, but I have to say they don't look over the moon. But Noble Foods has made advertisements showing their version of what their happy chickens look like. I have to say there is a bit of a contrast with the footage that the people for the ethical treatment of animals sent. Now, the chief executive of Noble Foods is Duncan Everett. We have again tried to speak to him. We would dearly like you to phone in, Duncan, just to show that you are not a cardboard cutout, and I'd love to talk to you. Thank you very much. Now, we have this interesting situation here then, that the story we're being told repeatedly in the media is that the biggest problem is sewage, and it certainly is the biggest problem in some places. But here on the River Wye, even the Environment Agency's own figures show that 2/3 of the phosphate coming into the river is coming from another source, it's coming from farming. And it turns out that farming nationwide is the top cause of river pollution. And broadly speaking, you can divide the country in two. In the eastern side of the country, most of the crap pouring into the rivers is human sewage. And in the western side of the country, broadly speaking, most of it is livestock manure. The other extraordinary aspect of this, I guess, is that while we've seen sewage farms, the privatised water companies, seriously under-regulated, farming itself is scarcely regulated at all. I mean, remarkably, according to recently released figures, a farm can expect a pollution inspection in England on average once every 263 years. Now, in 2018, the Westminster government brought forward what it calls its farming rules for water, which it said we're going to solve this major cause, the major cause of river pollution. And since then, there have been hundreds and hundreds of breaches and not a single penalty imposed. Total regulatory failure. That's what we're looking at. Now, while we haven't been able to talk to Duncan, and while we haven't been able to talk to the Environment Agency or the Westminster government, I'm delighted to say that the Welsh government has been prepared to talk to us. It has shown the fighting spirit, which is distinctly lacking on the other side of the border, unsurprising to people who know the Welsh. And Leslie Griffiths, their Secretary for Rural Affairs, agreed to talk to us. Unfortunately, we've had to break our rules. She wasn't able to talk to us live. This whole program's supposed to be live, but she had a meeting this evening, so I talked to her a little earlier. Now you're on record as saying that the pollution situation in Wales is embarrassing. I mean, it's actually, I would say it's more than embarrassing. I mean, I thank you for your honesty in saying it, but we're actually seeing these amazing rivers, the Wye, the Usk, the rivers of West Wales, they're dying before our eyes.
I certainly think the levels of pollution we have in Wales are absolutely unacceptable. And, it is embarrassing. It's embarrassing for all of us. It's embarrassing for the sector. And that is why I've had to bring forward the Control of Agricultural Pollution regulations. And, it's been a really tough job to bring those forward. I didn't want to have to mandate. I wanted to work on a voluntary approach. And certainly since I came in post 5 years ago, it's something I really tried hard to do. But unfortunately, the voluntary approach hasn't worked in the way that we would want to. And over the last 20 years, we have seen on average 3 substantiated agricultural pollution incidents a week.
I applaud your commitment, but at the same time, we're seeing Natural Resources Wales budget being cut by a third. They just can't do the monitoring. They can't do the enforcement. So what value is that commitment if the boots aren't on the ground?
You have to appreciate we have had 10 years of austerity. Of course, our budgets as a government have been cut, and you cannot support all our public services in the way that we as a Welsh government would have wanted to do so.
But the only way in which you are going to solve this is by actually closing down some of those chicken sheds, isn't it? Because, once the chickens are there, once they've been producing all that dung, whether it gets spread on the land or poured into the river, doesn't make any difference. It goes into the river.
Well, we also need the sector itself to take some responsibility to ensure that doesn't happen. But as I say, we are working with NRW, we're working with Powys County Council, and we're working with the sector. But it's about personal responsibility as well.
You're suggesting the sector closes itself down?
Well, I think, we have a part to play, don't we? We can't do it. No government can do this on its own. Local authorities can't do it, and the sector can't. It's about partnership working. But it's, a farmer has a responsibility not to pollute. So
you're not prepared to step forward and say the fundamental problem is actually it's not farmers being good or bad. It's just there are too many chickens in the catchment. There are just too many. It doesn't matter how responsible or irresponsible the farmer is if the catchment can't absorb that amount of dung. So then it's up to you to say we've got to close some of these chicken sheds.
Well, we certainly need to look at that. And if that is the case, then we will do that. Absolutely. We will look to do that.
Wow. Now that is something. I'd say that is a commitment. That could be our first result for Riverside Live. Amazing. She might actually close the chicken sheds. Right. Back to Leslie. Shouldn't there be continuous monitoring of the state of our rivers so that we know in real time whether or not pollution limits have been exceeded?
NRW are looking at a review of that, and we're working closely with them to make sure that it is monitored. Because you can imagine, when I was the Agricultural Minister and the Environment Minister, I used to say to the farming sector, who really pushed back against those regulations, that I had to have that balance. It was really important to me that we had the clean water that we require. We need that. The public want it. We all want it. If we're going to see a greener Wales, we have to address this now.
Great. Well, Leslie, thank you very much. I'm really grateful that we actually got a statement there. Very useful, very interesting. About the car, by the way, we had to do this in a convertible because otherwise we couldn't send a signal. So please don't give me a hard time. We couldn't find any other. And here we are crossing the River Wye as we go. Back over. God, I can smell it. I can actually smell the stink coming off it just as we cross the river. Blimey. Well, so the big question is, why? Why aren't we focused on this, the primary cause of river pollution? It's great that we're focused on sewage. That's a really great thing. I'm not saying we should in any way give the water companies an easier time. We shouldn't. But, the primary cause is actually is farming. And we know that from official figures. And I wonder, why is it? Could it be potentially that we have this sort of storybook image of farming that protects the industry from public scrutiny? Well, I couldn't think of anyone better to ask about this than the celebrated poet and Peaky Blinders actor and indeed children's author, Benjamin Zephaniah. Benjamin, what do you think of the programme so far?
As much as I love you, I find it really depressing. I'm really blown away by what I'm hearing. I have to say, I grew up in a family in Birmingham, and we could never afford holidays. And the best we could get was our dad putting us in the church van and driving us down to Ross-on-Wye and Hay-on-Wye. So as a kid, I remember the River Wye really well. And to see it now, I find it very, very depressing.
Just the free-range chickens. I mean, that also really shocked me. What did you make of that?
Again, I found that depressing. You see, this is kind of why I'm a vegan. I turned vegetarian when I was 11 and vegan when I was 13, because I just said, we should have nothing to do with this world, apart with the animal world. We should not exploit them in any way. They just need to be left alone, find their own kind of level of breeding and whatever, and just let them get on with life instead of kind of farming them and doing all the stuff we do to them. Because as the lady said, I can't remember her name, even free-range free-range chickens are not brilliant. It's just slightly less, but it will still wash up into the rivers. We've got to find a way of living with nature that's much better than what we're doing at the moment. And at a time like this, I get very frustrated when everybody's rushing to get back to what they call normal. Normal is polluting the rivers. Normal is polluting the skies. Normal is poisoning us. Normal is killing the animals. I don't want this anymore. I want something else.
Now, it would be horribly remiss of me to talk to you and not ask you for a poem. Would you by any chance have a poem which might be a bit relevant to rivers?
I do, and this is a poem I wrote when I kept going to rivers and mistaking. At one time, I thought I saw a swan, and when I got to it, it was a television, and I just saw all this stuff in rivers, and it inspired me to write this poem called City River Blues. Went to the river, seeking inspiration, saw dead fish floating, dead men boating, and condoms galore. Sat by the river, wondering, from where cometh that bloody smell? For if I was wise and I could tell, the world would know. This is our river. It runs through our lives. This is our river, our shit-colored river. It's had it, but it's ours. This river speaks. Every boot had a body. Every shirt had a friend. And the old boys say, they shall all meet where every river ends. Here by this river, Joe Public wrote songs, and ships came from far away. Capitalism lived here. Ships left from here to cheat someone somewhere. This river is on the map. The Queen came here. The King came here. Hitler bombed it. Joe Bloggs bombed it. 100 factories bomb it every day. But this river won't go away, they say. Went to the river, seeking inspiration. Got eco-depression. Got stopped and searched. Got called a coon. Got damned lungs. Got city river blues.
Benjamin, thank you. Love you, man. That was just amazing. Thank you so much. Now, we've been hearing so far about chronic river pollution, about the gradual seepage of manure, of sewage, of dung into our rivers, and the slow, well, fairly fast, but gradual death of those rivers as a result. But on top of this chronic pollution is layered acute pollution, sudden incidents of poisoning, which can wipe out entire river systems. And I've come to the river Llyfni to meet Emily Tilling. Emily, thank you very much. And you are in an idyllic setting, but this time last year, more or less,
you
saw something very much less than idyllic.
Yeah. So I was taking the dogs for a walk through the garden along here, and then one of the dogs suddenly jumped into the water, which she wouldn't normally do at this point.
And what did she? What made her do that, do you think?
Well, it was then that I noticed there was just loads of foam in the river.
I can see it, and all the bubbling, weird bubbling on top. What was that?
Those bubbles, I later realised, were little baby fish coming to the surface because they couldn't breathe. And then I noticed a large brown trout was flailing around in the water.
And this is your photo also. Oh my God! Look at all those. Those are like Miller's thumbs, aren't they? These little dead fish. And you've also got, I believe, some pictures. There they are. Look, coming to the surface.
Yes.
Now these bullheads or Miller's thumbs, they live under rocks, don't they? They never come to the surface normally.
I never see any of that.
And they're piling on top of each other, and crayfish as well.
Yeah, they were obviously trying to breathe, and the crayfish were all coming out. I saw lamprey, I saw all this stuff that I knew was in the river, but I never usually would see it, and certainly not in that state.
Oh my God. And then a day or two later, a professional photographer, Antonia Salter, came down here. And she's very kindly sent us some footage and pictures of hers in this same river. Mm-hmm. And there we are, underwater, and look, just coated.
Yeah.
With dead. It's just heartbreaking. It's actually, it's just, I love rivers. We all love rivers, and to see this happening, actually, it's hard to talk about it without getting a bit emotional.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It was definitely one of the worst things I'd ever seen.
It was about 6 o'clock in the evening. I rang Natural Resource Wales. They're
Which you
out
would
of
do.
hours line
Those are the
straight
people,
away.
you know, who do you
Yep.
call? You call Natural Resources
Yep.
Wales, yes.
Yep. And they said they would send somebody out to investigate.
And so they turned up immediately and took samples?
No, they rang me back a couple of hours later and said that they couldn't get anyone here. The light was failing. No.
Get anyone here?
No.
So when did they come?
About 8 o'clock the following morning.
So we're talking, what, 13 odd hours?
Yeah.
13 hours
Yeah.
between call and response when they actually come out. And of course, by that time, whatever had poisoned this river would have flushed through, wouldn't it? Unless it was still coming.
That evening, everything was alive. Yes, it was gasping on the riverbanks, but the scene the next morning, it was just, as your picture's shown, that was what you could see was just the dead fish lying on the riverbed.
And the pollution had gone, so if they tried to take a sample, they wouldn't have got it.
Yeah, no, the smell had gone from upstream by the morning.
Just amazing.
Yeah,
Good grief. Emily, thank you very much indeed for your testimony
no
and for your work. Thank you. So here we have it, you know, regulatory failure again. They just don't turn up. I mean, it's a bit like, you know, the police turning up 13 hours late for a bank robbery and expecting the suspect still to be on the scene. Well, so we did some digging to try to find out where this possibly could have come from. And as far as we can find, there's only 2 major units upstream of anything really substantial. One of them is a sewage treatment works run by Welsh Water, and they say, well, it couldn't possibly have been us because we're way above the point at which the fish death began. And the other is an anaerobic digestion company, a place where you bring together lots of waste, sometimes crops, in this case farm waste, abattoir waste, and you turn it into biogas and it leaves a residue. And in this case, and indeed in a case in 2016, it seems that the pollution began more or less where the river passes through their land, but they are adamant that it had nothing to do with them. They say it's very unfortunate what happened, we don't know how it was caused, but they deny that it was caused themselves. Now, I'm delighted to say that we have Natural Resources Wales on the line. And again, you know, I do take my hat off to the Welsh Government here, because actually it is stepping up and being accountable in a way that we're not finding on the other side of the border. And we have Gavin Bowen, who is Head of Operations for Mid Wales. Gavin, diolch yn fawr iawn am siarad â mi. Thank you very much, and thank you for stepping forward. Now, your officials, when there was a horrendous pollution incident, more or less a year ago, didn't turn up for 13 hours. What explains that?
Diolch, George. First of all, you know, we welcome the opportunity to come on the programme. We welcome the spotlight that it's putting on water pollution issues across Wales and the wider UK. As has been mentioned, we have got finite resources and we try to use those resources to the best effect. In terms of this particular incident, we really value those calls that we receive. You know, there are eyes and ears out across Wales where, you know, clearly we can't have staff everywhere spotting these things.
But Gavin, hang on a moment. 13 hours. 13 hours. I mean, that's not valuing the reports of the public.
So
that's not a quick response. Okay. What's going on? Is this bad management? What's happening here?
Unfortunately, on that evening, we were responding, sadly, to some other high-level incidents. That, combined with the travel time involved of getting the officer that was available to that location, meant that it would have been after dark. There were health and safety challenges, and you know, we do prioritise the health and safety of our staff in responding to any incident, as do any other response services.
So if you can't respond to more than one event at once, that suggests that you are massively understaffed, underfunded. I mean, if you can only go to one incident, you know, it's like the police only being able to go to one robbery or one murder. You know, it suggests you just don't have enough boots on the ground.
We constantly have dialogue with Welsh Government around the level of our resourcing, and you know, at the beginning of a new political term in Welsh Government, with new ministers who recognise how critical NRW are in delivering those ambitions in tackling the climate and nature emergencies, we will continue to have those discussions with them and look to use the resources that we have as effectively as we can.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, Gavin. Diolch yn fawr, Hwyl. Thank you. Well, so here we see, I think, just the result of years and years of underfunding. People like Gavin, is totally sincere. He wants to do his job, but if you don't have the money, you don't have the staff, you don't have enough people, how on earth can you keep on top of pollution? Now, talking of which, have we had any response from James Bevan, Environment Agency? Surprise, surprise. Well, we have had a written statement for them saying we don't tolerate illegality, we will hunt down the criminals, etc. You can see the full statement and statements from other people whom we criticised on our website, riverside.tv. But let's try to put this in some sort of context. We've seen two rivers today directly. I mean, we've connected with people beside other rivers in other parts of the country, but we've focused on the Wye and its tributary here, the Llinvi. Do these reflect the bigger picture? Now, I'm going to turn to the person who's perhaps the most effective rivers campaigner in the UK, and believe it or not, it's the former lead singer of the Undertones, Fergal Sharkey. Fergal, hello.
It's glorious to hear you.
Great to see you.
And well done, by the way.
Thanks very much indeed for joining us. Now, the picture you've seen that we've painted primarily of these two rivers, is this completely atypical? I mean, have we selected the worst possible cases and are just trying to push the case as far as it can go, or is this part of a wider pattern?
Rather sadly, George, I wish I could say that, but quite simply, I can't. As we stand here today in 2021, there is not a single river anywhere in England that meets good overall environmental health. Not one. Every single river is polluted. Now, by way of background, as Morgan mentioned earlier, we did introduce the Water Framework Directive in 2003. The objective was very clear. By 2015, every single river would be in good overall environmental health. It became obvious in 2014, only 17% of rivers met that criteria. That didn't matter. By 2015, it actually dropped to 15%. The government moved the goalposts and the deadline. 2015 became 2017, became 2021, became 2027. As we stand here today, there is not a single river anywhere in England that meets good overall health. And as for the 2027 deadline, forget about that. Government have brought in some guidance and have actually now created the situation where they've bypassed and sidestepped the 2027 deadline. If you now look at government's 25-year plan for the environment, you will say it says the goal is 75% of rivers in a natural state, whatever that means, as soon as is practicable. So government has clearly gone from 100% of rivers in good overall health by 2027 to 75% in a natural state, a meaningless term, as soon as is practicable. The whole thing, to use the political expression, is an omni shambles, and it's certainly a scandal.
My God. Well, what a brilliant and terrifying summary. Fergal, thank you so much for joining us, and keep up the good fight. Thank you. So, well, here we are in this extraordinary situation where our rivers, which we value and love so much, I mean, to an extraordinary degree, are just dying before our very eyes. I mean, they're literally just being turned in this case, into something that looks like something out of a horror film from the 1970s. I mean, here we are on a July evening, a really lovely, balmy July evening. It should be absolutely swarming with flies. There should be caddis flies coming off it, baetis flies coming off it. There should be trout rising left, right and centre, grayling, all sorts of other things we should be seeing. And there's nothing. Almost nothing. One or two flies. Very late yellow May dun. What's that doing? Oh, got picked up by a wagtail. Interesting. But anyway, that's it. There's scarcely anything at all. Just extraordinary. And the rivers, I mean, these are like the veins of the nation. This is where our lifeblood flows through. They're the great connectors, aren't they? They connect the countryside and the cities, the mountains and the sea, people and nature. And it's an extraordinary thing. You know, I get into rants about all sorts of things, and people half the time get really offended by what I say. They say, no, you're wrong about this, and on the other hand, and it's 6 of one and half a dozen of another. I'm not getting any of that when I talk about river pollution. No one is saying, actually, it's all right to dump raw sewage in the river. It's all right to have millions of chickens in the catchment pooping and all that dung going in the river. No one is saying we like the Poonami. Who's saying this? You know, we all agree it's wrong, and yet it's happening. And it's happening because of disgraceful government neglect that facilitates greed, that allows this to happen, allows profit-seeking entities to dump in our rivers, to use them as waste disposal chutes. And that's just not how we see them. And ultimately in England, of course, it comes down to this man. He could, at a stroke of a pen, change all this. I mean, he really could. He could just say, we're not going to tolerate it anymore. We're going to fund the regulators properly. We're going to enforce the law. Is that too much to ask? Enforcing the law? You know, I mean, people write me off as some crazy anarchist, but I'm calling for the law to be enforced, okay? The law to be enforced, that's all we're asking for. And for prosecutions. When people deliberately poison a river, as we've seen in many cases, where knowingly and deliberately, particularly water companies, poison a river, you know, sometimes the company gets prosecuted, but what's a company? It's an amorphous entity. You know, we need to see the executives prosecuted. Then they'll pay attention. Then they'll stand up and think about it and actually have second thoughts about what they might be doing. But we're just not seeing that at all. So into this vacuum, well, what do we have? We only have ourselves. We have to step into this vacuum. And of course, we're not a substitute for government. We don't have statutory powers. We don't have the money. We don't have the backing. But what we can do is embarrassment. What we can do is public pressure. And there's a fantastic example of that on the River Wharfe in Ilkley in Yorkshire. And one of the people who's been implementing this really to a delightful degree is Karen Shackleton. Now, Karen, tell us what you've been up to.
Well, here in Ilkley, we were outraged over how much raw sewage was being discharged into our river. So we got together a dream team, really, to work out how we could force the authorities to do something about it. And Kathleen Roberts, part of the Ilkley Clean River Group, came up with the idea of applying for bathing water designation. And as part of that, that would mean the Environment Agency would have to test the river water here on a weekly basis. And the council would have to advise the public of the levels of E. coli in the river, and they could take the decision whether to swim in the river or not. And this will then put pressure on Yorkshire Water to invest in the infrastructure of the sewage treatment systems and clean the river up.
Fantastic.
And luckily we're now the first river in the country to achieve bathing water designation.
Congratulations, Karen. This is a really great story. And this is a brilliant example, I think, of what we can do. Achieving bathing water designation. No other river in Britain has it. There's over 500 in France which have it. But by forming a group to befriend the river, to look after the river, Karen and her friends a glowing example of what people power can achieve. Because ultimately, you know, that is the only power we have, is getting together and acting as best as we can. And what we're asking you to do, well, really is a couple of things. First of all, to get political, and that means joining the campaign started by a new organisation which we're very much involved with at Riverside, called River Action. And they're trying to put pressure on the government for that very simple call to uphold the law. I mean, really, we're not asking for a lot. And that means they want to double the budgets of the regulators, and they want the government actually to do what it says on the tin and govern. So please support River Action, sign their petition, join their campaign for the effective regulation of our rivers. And the other thing is to do what Karen and her friends have been doing in the Ilkley. Such a great example, which is forming a friends group. And we've got wonderful news this evening that the Eden Project has agreed to come into partnership with us and to use the 6 million people on their mailing list to call out to them and say, will you please form friend groups? And Joe from the Eden Project is going to tell us very briefly about that. Hello, Joe.
Hi Hi, George. How are you? Working together, we can really amplify our voice and make a huge difference. We've got 1 million visitors who come down here. We've got 2 million online. And as you said, we've got communities right across the UK. And they always ask us, what can we actually do to make a difference? What can we actually do? So we're going to back your Riverside call. And we want everyone to join a friends group, or if there isn't one to join, they form a friends group. Why not? We want to give the river a voice. We want to protect the river. And that's one of the really best ways of doing it, this connection with the river that we've got. Because the future is ours to make. We started with nothing here. So the future's ours to make. So let's create a world we want to live in.
Joe Elworthy, thank you so much. Well, 2 brilliant examples here of what we can do. And it's about using our capacities, whatever they might be. And you might be political, in which case get political. You might be very good at social stuff, get social. You might be very good at artistic stuff, get artistic. And talking of which, and using that great creativity which Joe referred to, we asked one of the greatest poets in the land, Owen Shears, to hook up with one of the greatest singers in the land, Charlotte Church, and to write a song for us about rivers. Charlotte, take us out of the programme.